Go ahead and grab a sheet of notes and a Bible if you need it, and take a seat. Ian.
I got my
Caleb,
phone.
Trent. Hi.
I
Ian.
understand
Jayla, or are you Trent?
Ryan, shouldn't someone go put
Nice to meet
the
you.
ice cream away for you?
Yeah, I like milk cakes.
Ew.
Ew.
Oh, I always put my ice cream in the microwave just to melt it.
Yeah, I have to be why.
Matthew, there are things about you that I absolutely love. That's not one of them, but there are things about you.
Am I allowed to drink cream on the head?
Only on Tuesday.
Oh,
Okay, what is the name of the series we've been going through?
Vapor.
Why?
Everything's vapor.
What do you mean by that?
Everything is useless and everything just fades away to vapor.
Right, nothing brings satisfaction to my soul except
Done.
Jesus. Nothing brings satisfaction to my soul except Jesus Christ. We may think it does. We may be tempted to think that things are going to satisfy, that money's going to satisfy, that fame is going to satisfy, but nothing brings satisfaction to my soul like Jesus Christ. So today we're in chapter 5. Ecclesiastes chapter 5. What I want to talk about tonight, is it tonight or is it this evening? Which one is it?
This evening.
This
Tonight.
evening. What I want to talk about this
Not
evening
until it's dark.
is the difference between true worship and false worship. The difference between true worship and false worship. Okay, we're on this journey to find the meaning of life. You guys remember when we came together, we were going to find the meaning of life, we're going to go on that journey. And here we are. The next step in that journey is we're going to learn the difference between true worship and false worship. Let me tell you something you guys may or may not know. Life is worship. What I mean by that is that in your life, you will worship something, or rather someone. You will either worship God, or you will worship yourself. And we're going to talk about that. So open your Bibles to Ecclesiastes chapter 5. If you have one of these Bibles, yes, something you want to add to that. You can take.
I'm sorry. That was completely unnecessary.
If you have one of these blue Bibles in your hands right now, it is on page 555. On chapter 5 is on 555. You'll believe it. That's pretty cool. All right. Read together with me. I will read and you can read silently. Verse 1 says this: Guard your steps when you go to the house of God. To draw near to listen is better than to offer the sacrifice of fools. For they do not know that what they are doing is evil. Be not rash with your words, nor let your heart be hasty to utter a word before God. For God is in heaven and you are on earth. Therefore let your words be few. For a dream comes with much busyness, and a fool's voice with many words. All right, stop right there for a second. The difference between true worship and false worship. Point number 1 on your notes. True worship is worshiping, who do you think? God. Okay, you guys got that figured out. Duh, we knew that one. True worship is worshiping God. When Solomon starts writing Ecclesiastes chapter 5, he's like, I got something to tell you. Guard your steps when you go to the house of God. What do you think he's saying there? What do you think he's saying? Guard your steps when you go to the house of God. You don't know?
Where's his own shoes?
No, he's saying this. Letter A. Take it seriously. When we go to worship God, we should take it seriously. Now, I got a question about that. Does worshiping God happen only at church? Does worshiping God happen in the car?
Yes.
Can worship of God happen at Walmart? Can worship of God happen at school? Can worship of God happen on the toilet?
Yes.
Believe it or not.
What is worshiping God? What is worshiping God? What is worship?
They got it.
Technically, it's not illegal to worship God at school.
What's worshiping God? What's worshiping God? Focus on worship. Define worship for me. It is
Honoring God in everything you say and do.
Honoring God in everything you say and do. So can you do that at school?
Yes.
Can you do that at Walmart? Can you do that at church? Absolutely. Well, we're talking about, there's actually kind of two things about worship. One, all of our life should be worship for God, right? But two, the Bible talks about what we call corporate worship, which is where we come together on Sundays or Wednesday nights or something together as God's body and we worship Him. And if you look at the context, verse 1 says, guard your steps when you go to the house of God. When you're coming together to worship, take it seriously. Letter A. Letter B, listen carefully. He says, be not rash with your words, nor let your heart be hasty to utter word before God. For God is in heaven and you are on earth. Therefore let your words be few. Listen carefully. When we come together to worship God, God's got something to tell you. And if you're not listening, you're going to miss it. So take it seriously, listen carefully, and then number C, follow convictions. Now join me in verse 4. When you vow a vow to God, do not delay in paying it, for He has no pleasure in fools. Pay what you vow. It is better that you should not vow than that you should vow and not pay. Okay, now, join me in mind as we think back 3,000 years ago. They did things a little bit different back then. And they had sometimes vows that they would make to God. Sometimes they would even come with money or a sacrifice. And I will vow to God that I will do this. And that was their custom back then. We don't really do that today. But one thing that we kind of do, or what God does in our hearts, is when we come to God's house and we're listening to a sermon or we're listening to a message from God, often He speaks to our heart. You ever hear God speak to you? You ever hear the preacher preaching and you're like, that is me. He's talking about me. I need to do something about that. When I say follow your convictions, what I'm saying is listen to what God is telling you and follow through with that. If God's saying something like, hey, you've got sin in your life in this area, you need to deal with it. Don't just leave it at church, go home and deal with it. That's what I'm talking about when I say follow convictions. And letter D is fear God. Fear God. Verse 7. When your dreams increase and your words grow many, there is vanity. But God is the one you must fear. Fear God. See that fear there? Is that actually like being afraid? Like, being afraid of spiders or bears or, TV? Is that what we're talking about? What are we talking about?
Fear like you fear your parents.
Fear like you fear your parents? What's another word we can put there?
Respect.
Respect. She said it. I know, but I want you to say it anyway. Respect. Absolutely. That's what we're talking about. When we come to worship God, we come with an attitude of respect. Now, is it okay to horse around, clown around, and be fun? Is that okay? Yeah. But if we did that all the time, we would be missing some things that God really wants to share with us. So when we come together... Life would get boring, yeah. When we come together to worship God, we need to take it seriously, listen carefully, follow convictions, and fear Him. Okay, that's true worship. You guys agree with that? That's good things to do? That's what he's talking about? Okay, now we're going to contrast false worship. Point number 2. False worship is worshiping...
Yourself.
Self, yes. Worshiping yourself. You're like, I would never bow down to myself in a mirror. That's so weird. Okay, I get you. I would never do that either. But there are ways we can worship ourselves. Solomon's going to get that. Verse 8. If you see in a province the oppression of the poor and the violation of justice and righteousness, do not be amazed in the matter. For the high official is watched by a higher, and there are yet higher ones over them. But this is gain for a land in every way, a king committed to cultivating fields. Okay, sometimes you might be reading the Bible and you're like, what? Raise your hands if you think that sometimes the Bible is hard to understand. That's okay, I do too. Sometimes the Bible is hard to understand. Okay, he's talking about injustice here. He's talking about, as you go through your life, you're going to see injustice. Guess what? Injustice stems from worshiping ourselves. Did you realize that? Injustice stems from worshiping ourselves. Worshiping ourselves will lead to injustice. You're like, what are you talking about? Okay. Look up here. How many of you guys watch Sherlock Holmes? You know what I'm talking about?
Which one?
No, I'm going to that. Sherlock Holmes. Okay. In the newest Sherlock Holmes, the newer versions of the BBC,
Yes.
they made him a little slightly to moderately more arrogant than he was in the books. We won't get into that because Ian and I could argue that all night. But they made him a little more arrogant to where he would completely speak his mind unfiltered sometimes. In other words, somebody's crying in the room over a case and he just blurts out something insulting. And Watson's like, dude, he may not say it like that. He might say it with a British accent. Dude. Completely unfiltered, just speaks his mind and does that person a great injustice. See, when we're worshiping ourselves, when I don't care what other people think, we can do great injustice toward them. So letter A is false worship leads to we hurt people. When we are selfish, just like the oppressors he was talking about in verses 8 through 9, when we are oppressive, we'll hurt people. When we're selfish, we're going to be unjust toward people. We're going to hurt people. We might say things or do things because we're worshiping ourselves. We're doing only what we want to do, and it hurts people. Letter B, false worship is worshiping self that leads to greed. We are never satisfied. It leads to greed. Look at verse 10. He who loves money will not be satisfied with money, nor he who loves wealth with his income. This is also vanity. When goods increase, they increase to eat them, and what advantage has their owner but to see them with his eyes? Sweet is the sleep of the laborer when he eats little or much, but the full stomach of the rich will not let him sleep. What is he saying? Is he saying rich people are sinners? No, that's not what he's saying. What he's saying is that worshiping self leads to greed. Worshiping self leads to greed. And guess what? Greed. The funny thing about greed, when I want, it's never satisfied. It's like fire.
You better go.
Is fire ever satisfied?
No.
Is it ever going to come to a point where it's like, I've had enough paper, I'm good. Oh, look, it's did. Will it ever come to a point where it's like, I've had enough paper, I'm good to go? Is fire ever satisfied? No, not until we put it out. Over in the sink. Done.
You're boring.
That's not good.
You know,
Alright, fire is never satisfied. Guess what? Guess what? Yeah, guess what, Gavin? Greed is never satisfied. If I'm worshiping myself, that will lead to greed. Greed in one way or another. You could be greedy for money. You could be greedy for friends on Facebook. You could be greedy for books. You could be greedy for, you name it. And we treat it like it's going to satisfy us, but it never, ever, ever will. We talked about materialism a few weeks ago. Does materialism satisfy? Do you ever get to a point, if I'm pursuing things, if I'm pursuing objects, if I'm pursuing them to satisfy the thirst of my soul, will I ever reach that point? No, I want more and more. And the latest thing comes out, and the next thing comes out, and the new CD comes out, and the new movie comes out, and I gotta have, and it never satisfies my soul. Worshipping self will lead to injustice, it leads to greed, and letter C, it leads to loneliness. Loneliness. Verse 13. There's a grievous evil that I've seen under the sun. Riches were kept by their owner to his hurt, and those riches were lost in a bad venture. And he is a father of a son, but he has nothing in his hand. As he came from his mother's womb, so shall he go again. Naked as he came, and shall take nothing for his toil that he may carry to his hand. This also is grievous evil. Just as he came, so shall he go. Get this. And what gain is it to him who toils after the wind? Moreover, all his days he shall eat in darkness, in much vexation and sickness and anger. Worshipping self. It tells the sad story of a guy. That's what he's doing. Is he's telling the sad story of a guy who worshipped himself. He chased after money. He was greedy. He lost all his money. He had nothing to give his son. It destroyed that relationship, and it led to what? Darkness, vexation, sickness, and anger. Loneliness. When we worship ourselves, it's going to lead to loneliness. How many of you guys want to hang out with someone who is only, always, ever thinking of themselves? I mean, maybe you meet them and once or twice, it's like, okay, I'm hanging out with this person. And then after a few times, you're like, they just think of themselves. They never think of me. They never think of anybody. They're just thinking of themselves. I really don't want to hang out with this person. So you might like unfriend them, or you might like stop hanging out with them or something. Now think about you in that situation. If you're the one being selfish and only thinking of yourself, you're going to end up alone because people are like, I don't want to hang out with that person. You call them up, hey, let's go hang out. Ooh, I've got a root canal schedule. I got to take care of this. I just, whatever. Worshipping ourselves leads to loneliness. Okay, the conclusion. Verse 18. Behold, what I have seen to be good and fitting is to eat and drink and find enjoyment in all the toil with which one toils under the sun the few days of his life that God has given him, for this is his lot. Everyone else to whom God has given wealth and possessions and power, to enjoy them and to accept his lot and rejoice in his toil, this is the gift of God. For he will not much remember the days of his life because God keeps him occupied with the joy of his heart. Conclusion? Simply this. Enjoy the life God has given you. We talked about that. You guys remember that a few weeks ago? We talked about, hey, when it comes to contentment, just enjoy the life that God has given us. And one of the best ways to do that, let me tell you right now, one of the best ways to do that is practice saying thank you to God. Say thank you to people too. But practice saying thank you to God. Everybody right now, let's practice. Ready? Thank you. That was weak. Let's do it again. Thank you.
My throat
You guys
hurts.
tired?
My throat hurts.
All right, one more time. Ready? 3, 2, 1.
Thank you.
All right, very good, very good. When you get up, when you go to bed, when you're tempted to covet someone else's things, or when you see something someone else has, remind yourself to tell God, thank you. Thank you for the life that you've given me. Thank you for the parents that you've given me. Thank you for the brother or sister you've given me, Aaron, Bernard, Michael. Thank you, God, for everything that you've given me. That's me saying, how we overcome these things, how we overcome a life of selfishness, a life of worshiping self, is we need to enjoy the life that God has given us. There are two paths here. We either worship God or we worship ourselves. Gavin, I want to watch this video. Everyone who hears these words of mine and does them will be like a wise man who built his house on a rock. And the rain fell, and the floods came, and the winds blew and beat on the house, but it did not fall because it had been founded on a rock. And everyone who hears these words of mine and does not do them will be like a foolish man who built his house on the sand. And the rain fell, and the floods came, and the wind blew and beat against the house. And what happened? It fell. It got destroyed. Two paths. Worshipping Jesus or worshipping self. Two paths. True worship or false worship. True worship takes God seriously, it listens carefully, it follows convictions, and it fears God. So let me ask you this. Who are you worshiping? Yourself or God? All right, people, let's break out.
Yeah, I just like.
All right. Guys, go with us. We go to the next room, and ladies stay here with Julia and with Hannah. Kevin.
Eventually.